Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this segment of Ask the Superintendent. It's budget time, and as we did with our recent episode on school safety in the Chelmsford Public Schools, we've assembled a panel to provide an overview of the budget process and answer several questions that have come in from parents and community members on the topic of budget. For this panel, I'm joined by Dennis King, who is the chair of the Chelmsford School Committee, and Laurie Pellegrino, who is a parent in the district, who is going to serve as the moderator for our discussion. So I'd like to thank both Dennis and Laurie for being here for this episode, and turn it over to Laurie.
Thank you. Happy to be here with both of you. I'd like our viewers to gain an understanding about some of the basics about the budget. Let's start with the timeline. Every year, the school committee presents a budget for approval to the town meeting in April, but work starts much earlier than that. So can you tell us a little bit, looking at the budget and what the major steps in the process are before it gets to the town meeting?
Sure. If you'd like, in the fall of each year, sometime right after Thanksgiving, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we actually start our work on the budget in the school department. So I meet with each of the individual principals, department coordinators, our admin staff in the district, and we talk about priorities for the following year. We take a look at our existing goals and objectives that we're trying to work on, and we talk about needs in the district. We typically start with what's called the level service budget, so to be able to figure out what our carrying costs from one year to another are going to be. And then we take a look at what additional services or programming we'd like to be able to provide for the following year. So between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we really kind of formalize that process. We also started to talk with the town manager's office around budget recommendations to make sure that recommendations that we're going to bring forward for the budget are in line with what the town feels they're going to be able to afford for us. So we try to work collaboratively with the town manager's office on that. And sometime after the first of the year, between January and February school vacation, is when we actually finalize all of our projections. We take a look at our budget proposals that come in again from individual schools, department coordinators, departments within the district, and we figure out what is going to be included in the superintendent's recommended budget. And then the first meeting in February, the first school committee meeting, I make a presentation to the school committee with my recommendations for the budget for the following year. And then that gets turned over to the school committee. And just actually last evening, the school committee had their first budget deliberation process where we go page by page through the budget. Now, would you like to kind of talk about how that goes?
Yeah, as far as the budget document, it's obviously that's the timeline. I mean, I think the budget is something we work on all year. I mean, a lot of the things that are in the budget are things that come out of our discussions over the course of the year. So if you look at some of the new initiatives, there were definitely topics that came up. As far as the document itself, last night we went through the budget page by page and kind of asked questions if people had questions, and looked at where the various monies are being spent, and we approved each page, and we approved the final number. And then from there, I believe you have to go to the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen, and
Right.
And that's the next step in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So last night, the school committee we go page by page through the budget. They approve a bottom line budget. And then I'll actually meet with a subcommittee of the Finance Committee in town, and then a full presentation to the Finance Committee sometime in mid-March, and then ultimately town meeting at the end of April.
Mm-hmm.
So at town meeting is when our budget is actually appropriated. So even though the school committee has adopted a budget which is in line with the town manager's recommendation for town meeting still needs to vote to appropriate the funding. So that'll happen at the end of April, and then our budget is set for the following year.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I think you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but a parent was asking who you consult with when drafting the budget, for example, principals, coordinator, school committee, finance team.
Sure.
Any other folks?
Yeah, I mean, as Dennis said, the school committee talks about a lot of different initiatives during the course of the year. We provide reports, and at our different school committee meetings, we talk about initiatives that are ongoing in the district. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there are any real surprises within the budget document. Everything is aligned to the work that we've been doing around our district goals as part of our strategic planning. 2 years ago, all of our district administrators, about 30, so these would be building-based administrators, department coordinators, and whatnot, all got together to put together a 3-year plan for for the schools. So the budget document very much reflects the work of that group and what our priorities were. So those individuals are obviously involved with recommendations for the budget to see if the plans that we had are moving along. Are there areas that we didn't think about, we have to put more resources into? Have we actually completed something ahead of time so that we can then reallocate resources from one area to another? That all is really all encompassing. And it is individual staff within buildings and departments for the district in tight communication with the school committee to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Okay. Can we talk about the expression comparable districts? This comes up a lot in the budget overview. The budget presentation shows the comparison group, and towns listed are not what most parents would expect. Can you explain why we are grouped in these towns?
Sure. I'll start and then maybe we can
Yeah.
talk a little bit. The Department of Education actually produces what are called your comparable districts. So they take a look at your closest demographic. What they take a look at is your actual student enrollment, your grade level configurations, because different districts have different age groups. So our elementary schools are all, say, K to 4. Our middle schools are 5 to 8, high schools 9 to 12. Most districts have 9 to 12 as high school, but other districts might have, K to 5 as a school. They may have more of a middle school model, so they have 6 to 8. So you want to be grouped among like districts. They also take into consideration your demographic. So they take a look at your free and reduced lunch rates to try to get an indication of wealth or poverty within a community. They take into consideration the percentage of students who receive special education services, the percentage of students who are identified as English language learners, and they actually try to group you more and take a look at comparisons among that group as opposed to just like your local group. So a lot of parents might say, well, why aren't we just compared with, say, Billerica and Dracut and Tewksbury? Because a lot of it really has to do with our size and our actual makeup of the district. So they take a look statewide at what your 10 most comparable districts are, and then they produce figures on academics and spending based on that grouping. So in addition to, we always try to compare ourselves obviously to the comparable districts and then the state averages, just when it comes to performance and to try to see how our kids are actually achieving compared to like communities. We have the data from all of our surrounding, say, Merrimack Valley communities, and we can pull that too and do our own analysis to see how we stack up against, again, a Tewksbury or a North Andover. But the department actually takes a look at your most comparable districts based on, again, those other factors, your size and wealth and things along
And
those
those can
lines.
change. I mean,
Year to year.
I think they have changed recently, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's always some within the 10
Yeah.
that stay the same, but every year there's a district or two that gets added in a different district.
So somebody might say, well, how come you used to be compared to that community, but now you're not? And it's just the demographics for the most part,
Right.
that are changing.
Right, but I think that gives us a good benchmark, again, to just be able to compare how much we're spending on certain populations and programs. Is it in line with what other districts our size are spending? Are our students performing, at or above those other districts? And those are some of the key indicators that we look at.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, student-teacher ratios. So when I hear this phrase, I think classrooms with one teacher per 23 students, for instance. But the document shows our ratio as 1 to 13 to 4. That's a big difference.
Right, it is. And it's hard for people to understand. One of the only ways to really look at statewide student-teacher ratios is actually to take the total number of teachers in a district we have to report to the Department of Education. All of our regular ed teachers, all of our special ed teachers, any teachers that do small group therapies, any of our licensed staff, compared to the actual just total number of pupils that we have. And the state takes that and basically just divides the number of pupils by the total number of staff that you're reporting, and that's why that number is lower. I think what's significant to look at is obviously our average class size in the district is not 13 to 1, but that's an indicator to take a look at other districts and just see if we're in comparison to those other districts and how we actually stack up to the state. So on average, our elementary schools have more of a 20 to 24 on average number of students sitting in a mainstream classroom. Our middle school classrooms are probably 22 to 25, and our high school is in that same ballpark as well. But when we look at the number that's reported by the state, again, that's actually just taking the total number of teachers we have, dividing it by the number of students that we have to figure out that ratio. We're actually in about the middle, we're in the mid-range of most districts on all of our comparisons on our comparables, which is good. We're actually a little bit lower than the state average when it comes to per pupil. Not per pupil, I'm sorry, average class size. So we actually, the state has a little bit better average class size than we do in Chelmsford. But among our comparable districts, we're right in the middle.
So your average classroom, regular ed class is going to be 20 to 25.
Right.
But then you account for your special ed classes, your specialists, and that's where the other numbers come from.
Okay, thank you. Follow up on the proposed staff cuts. Parent of a current 7th grader is asking what it means for next year's 8th graders to have 2 7th grade teachers cut at McCarthy. How will this work for 8th grade students at McCarthy?
Sure. So we actually took a look district-wide a few years back at our overall enrollments in the middle schools. We have 2 middle schools, Parker and McCarthy. Parker has, it's called an 8-strand configuration. So there are 8 classrooms at each grade level, 8 5th grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th. At McCarthy, they actually had a 10-strand system. So there were, 10 5th, 10 6th, 10 7th, 10 8th. And when we looked at the enrollments, our enrollment was declining a little bit at the middle school level. And based on the assignment of students, we factored and projected that McCarthy could actually drop to an 8-strand in middle school to be comparable to Parker, that we didn't need to keep the extra 2 sections. So 2 years ago, we eliminated 2 of the 5th grade classrooms at McCarthy. This current year, we eliminated 2 6th grade classrooms at McCarthy. And next year, we're set to do 7th, the year after 8th. 5th and 6th grade was a little bit easier to do because we have kind of a model where a teacher teaches math and science and a second teacher teaches ELA and social studies. And the children basically move among those 2 teachers. When you get to 7th and 8th grade, it's more of a specialist area or subject matter area. So a student would see 4 different teachers. They'd see an independent teacher for math, science, social studies, and English. What this will mean for McCarthy next year, because again, they have a split team at McCarthy, basically, which is that extra section. Through seniority, we have to figure out which teachers are actually affected, but the 7th grade will move to 8 strands, so again, be comparable to Parker. The 2 8th grade teachers that end up remaining for the year, one of them is going to need to teach math and science, and another is going to be able to have to teach ELA and social studies. So it'll be similar to like the 5th and 6th grade model for that grouping. We currently have about 180 students in 7th grade going to 8th grade next year. If we weren't to make that cut, the actual class sizes for the middle school and kept it at 10 are going to be about 18 students per class, which is really just too low comparison's sake to our other middle school classrooms, and even that of, say, Parker for that grade level. So that's why we're recommending the reduction for next year. Even keeping it with the 8, it's going to keep about a 22, 23 average class size, which is actually really it's exceptional for the middle school, but it's certainly something that we strive for.
Right. And when we looked at it, the 6th going to 7th, that's where the numbers are going down.
Right.
7th going to 8th is still a big class. So somebody
Right.
mentioned last night at our school committee meeting of, why don't you just do them both at the same time and then everything stays even keel? But it's too big a class to really do that. You'd end up
Right.
with 28, 29 in a class if you were to do that. So this is
Right.
probably the best way to do it and have the least impact on the kids.
It would have been easier to be able to reduce the 7th and 8th at the same time. But again, we don't want to harm the next year's 8th grade,
Right.
because if you did that and you knock that down to an 8-strand middle school, you'd be looking at 27, 28 as your average class size, which we don't want to do. So we have staff that are dual certified, that they're certified to teach math and science and ELA and social studies. So that's our recommendation for next year.
Okay, thank you. So our budget this year is $2 million higher than last year's. How is the final budget total and increases decided?
The final actually appropriation really comes down to town meeting. So town meeting, we'll have to make a recommendation and defend our budget at town meeting. Town meeting could increase our budget, town meeting could decrease our budget. But I think what typically happens is I will try to work closely with the town manager, who ultimately has to recommend the overall town budget. And he takes into consideration all the individual department needs, including the school department needs, when trying to figure out exactly what the town will be able to afford. So again, in our work between Thanksgiving and Christmas, when we're talking about what our needs for the next year, and we talked about what a level service budget would be and some of those additional enhancements we'd like to add to the budget, we estimated at that point in time about a $2 million contribution from the town would be able to satisfy our needs for the year. Additionally, within our budget, we ended up having a few line items go down, which doesn't typically happen, but we had some special education costs that actually are decreasing next year. So that provided a little bit of extra wiggle room within our budget to be able to add back some additional services elsewhere. But that $2 million figure comes really basically from the town manager's recommendation, but certainly with our input. And then going into town meeting, we're hoping to have a successful town meeting. We've had that for the last couple of years. I think it's nice when the town manager's recommendation kind of meets the school department's request and all department requests. There's not a lot of animosity between departments, and I think town meeting will go relatively smoothly once we have the opportunity to talk about our budget and what our recommendations are. But a lot of that really comes from that front end work to see exactly what the town has for resources and what our needs are.
And at $2 million, it sounds like it is a lot, but really, when you look at the level service budget, after you account for step changes, people moving up another year in experience, lane changes, people getting new degrees. We're currently starting negotiations with the union where you look at increases of utilities. I mean, that eats up
Right.
at least three quarters of it right there. So, there's not a lot of, extra on the bone.
Our staffing alone, just when you talked about like your step increases and lane increases, that was about $1.6 million in total. Where all municipal budgets are staff heavy or heavy in bodies. There's not a lot of extra resources for non-personnel expenditures. That other, say, $400,000 or so went towards just your annual carrying costs for a lot of your non-personnel services. So the $2 million goes pretty quickly. Again, we were fortunate to be able to have some additional savings within our own budget to be able to do some of those additions.
Right.
But it
When
gets
you look
there
at all the
quickly.
things we're proposing to do, I mean,
Right.
it's amazing we were able to fit it all in that amount of money. So,
Okay, thank you. Does the state give us money as well?
Yes, the state does. Every year, they actually give the town the money, and then the town appropriates it to the schools. It's called Chapter 70 is the term that they give us, but that's our state increase each year. It's all based on a formula on our enrollment as of October 1st of this past year. So our October 1 enrollment in 18 is the kind of the baseline to figure out what our calculation for 19 is going to be. For fiscal 20, which is going to start in July. We receive not a significant amount of annual increase in Chapter 70. Approximately $100,000 comes from the state. And then the town tax base and levy actually kicks in the remainder of that $2 million. So of the $2 million, approximately $100,000 is coming from the state, and $1.9 million is coming from the town.
and it's a hot button issue because
It is.
different towns get different reimbursement rates, and people are wondering where's the equity in that. And I know there's a big push to try to make some modifications to that. It's still pending at this point, so hopefully in a few years we'll see some changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you explain net school spending? What is that, and what is Chelmsford's position?
Sure. Net school spending it's another calculation, obviously, that takes into consideration Chapter 70 funding, the amount of money that the city appropriates annually to support the schools. And it's part of a formula, again. Net school spending, it's a calculation that the Department of Education does to tell you what the minimum amount of funding the school department should receive to provide what they classify as an adequate education. So across the state, every municipality is given a number, basically, that they should be spending on education for their community, K to 12. And that takes into consideration all of your K to 12 pupils, so your public schools and charter schools and whatnot. Each community has that figure. That is kind of the floor. So when you take a look at how much communities actually spend in net school spending, as a floor, everyone typically is spending above that. So we, I want to say, ballpark, it was about 35% above net school spending in fiscal 17, which was the last year that was reported, was in Chelmsford. What we again want to see is how does that stack up against our comparable districts, and you'll find us right in the middle. So I think there's about 5 of our 10 districts that actually spend less on Chapter 70 as a percentage above net school spending, and about 5 spend more. So we're spending right in the middle. We actually spend slightly less than the state average in net school spending. But again, we're in
Right,
that,
kind of in the middle.
in that
you know,
middle
so we're
band.
not too low, not too high.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What about per pupil spending? We're lower than comparable districts. Is this a good thing?
Again, on per pupil spending, so this takes into consideration the total amount of money that you spend just divided by your students. We're right in the middle on this one as well, as far as that is concerned. We are below the state average, but when it comes to our comparable districts, again, we're right in the middle. I forget exactly how many, but 4 or 5 are below and 4 or 5 are above. We spend, I believe, fiscal 18 was the last year that was reported, and it was about $13,300 per pupil was what we spent on education in our community. I believe the state average was around $15,400, I want to say, in that ballpark range. But again, amongst our comparable communities, we're spending right in the middle. So I do think Chelmsford as a whole makes a very significant and serious investment in education. I certainly appreciate the money that the town meeting and the town manager recommend for the schools. I think it's fair and equitable given what other departments in the town receive and the amount of services we're able to provide. I wouldn't want to see us be on the low end of any of those scales. So if when it came to, say, class size, if our class sizes ended up being much higher than our comparable districts, I'd be concerned. If our per pupil spending, was on the low end of our comparable districts, if we weren't meeting net school spending, or we dipped to be, significantly below the state averages, I'd be concerned. But I think we're actually, fairly we receive a fair amount of funding from the city or from the town, and again, that's all predicated on the state funding.
Right, and I think the key is, in our comparables, we're right in the middle. You look at the state average, there are some districts that have more students with more needs, so they're going to have to spend more money. So I think when we're looking at comparables, we have a similar population, similar demographics. That's kind of where you really want to, where your comparison really is going to be.
All right. One of the largest segments of the budget is salaries. Can you talk a little bit about how we compare to other districts in this area?
Right in the middle.
The theme here.
Again.
Yeah, the thing is, we're kind of in the middle. In our budget document, which is online, so any resident of the community could access it, we actually have charts that lay out all of these different figures. But again, what you'll find is we are a little bit less than the state average, but we're in the middle of our comparable districts. Again, I think it just speaks to us, kind of providing a quality education in the mid-range of funding. What I've always said, and when we looked at last year, is even though our funding is basically in the middle of our comparable districts, when it comes to performance, we're actually far exceeding the comparables, which is significant. So for receiving, midway funding, but performing in either number 1 or 2, when you take a look at our students' performance on the ELA and Math MCAS and Science MCAS at different grade levels, I'm very proud of how our students stack up academically, given those resources.
Yeah, we have a great, teaching staff all throughout in all of our schools, and it shows in those results. And I think we try to have a district where the teachers want to stay, and I think we have a good track record as far as that. So it's not like people are coming here and teaching for 3 years and then going off somewhere else. A lot of our teachers are been here for a long time. So I think it just speaks to the climate and everything else in the schools and their comfort level with working in Chelmsford.
Right. Yeah, we have a very dedicated staff at our elementary, middle, and high schools. Very consistent, and they really enjoy coming to work, I think, each day, and we appreciate having them.
All right. How are raises calculated for teachers and administrators? Is this a contract and union matter?
It is. So we actually are going to be entering into negotiations with each of our employee units this spring. All of our contracts end on June 30th for our teachers, our professional support staff, our administrators. So we'll enter into contract negotiations. The school committee will appoint a subcommittee to negotiate each of the individual contracts. And what we do is take a look at kind of market rates. We will take a look at our comparable districts. We have that data, and negotiate a fair package for all of our different employee groups. Again, we mentioned a little bit earlier, salaries make up a significant portion of the budget. I don't have the exact percentage, but it's in the low to mid 70% points of our budget. So a significant amount of financing goes into the personnel side of the budget. So it's obviously something we take seriously, and when we go into negotiations, we have to look at that.
Yeah, and it like the budget itself, a lot of this is in consultation with the town manager and, looking at what the town can afford, not just what the schools can afford, and, and try to be consistent across not just the school department, but all the departments in terms of raises and new contracts and that type of thing. So, we're off to a good start with that.
Right.
We're already one down and a couple to go. So.
All right. So you noted a few minutes ago that salaries take up a large portion of the budget. So, other initiatives, pie in the sky, if you had a wish, something you could get for Chelmsford schools, but is impossible due to money constraints, what would it be?
One of the things, and we're already starting this a little bit this year, is if we could eliminate fees, that would be terrific. If we could take that burden off of parents. Right now we have bus fees and we have athletic fees and activity fees. And those do take the toll. You have 3-4 kids in the schools. That adds up quickly. So pie in the sky, if we could do something like that, would be great. I mean, we are trying to make a little dent in that. We have in the new budget we have some of the activities that are more community service based, more honor society based. We're waiving the fees for those particular activities. I know we've dropped the activity fees at both the high school and the middle schools, so save a little money there. And we've even eliminated the parking fee at the high school. So the students that used to park at the high school had to pay the same as the bus fee. And as we started to look at that, we thought that maybe that would be a good place to kind of ease the burden a little bit on people. So if we could eliminate them all, that'd be great. Again, that's sort of a pie in the sky because those are big dollars. They do add up over time, but that would be something that we could do.
Yeah, just to that point, I agree fully. We are taking a look at that, and I think over the course of this year, we are going to actually bring those fees down a little bit. Our high school fees are going to go from 125 down to 100. Our middle school fees are going to go from 100 down to 75. Again, we're recommending reducing the parking fee at the high school, and I think we don't have the resources right now to be able to do it all at the same time, but we're going to try to step those fees down over the next couple of years, and I think that it'll help families in the community, and we'll be able to do it in a way that we can manage it within the context of our operational budget.
Right.
Okay.
Like I said, it's a big amount, so you can't pull all of that out of the budget all at once. But we'll try to do the best we can with that.
All right. Excellent. So another item on people's minds are the buildings. The newest building is the high school, and that's about 50 years old. A few years ago, we talked about building a new high school, shifting around existing schools to make better use of the space. We were turned down last year for state funding for a new building. What is the current plan while we wait for funding?
So it's a timely question. We're actually in the process now of submitting or preparing to submit another application to the Massachusetts School Building Authority for consideration. So we have applied for the last 2 years for a high school project. We were unsuccessful, and we're competing against all other cities and towns in the state that are looking to do high school projects or any kind of school projects. So we're going to apply again. We're going to try to keep tweaking and making our application as compelling as possible. And that will be a topic, actually, the school committee takes up this spring, summer, and next fall as we talk about what strategy we should employ to help hopefully bring a new building to Chelmsford.
Kind of add on to that, there's also another program that allows us to do repairs to certain buildings. So we just put in an application for a roof repair at South Row. It's a different program, but it's through the same agency. So looking at those ways of keeping these older buildings going too.
I would like to thank Laurie for moderating this discussion this evening, and Dennis for coming on board to talk about school committee insight into the budget planning process from his perspective. As you can see from our discussion and the answers provided this evening, our budget is significant and provides a roadmap for our work in the coming year. The Chelmsford Public Schools provides an exceptional education to the students entrusted to our care. The district effectively uses the resources appropriated annually by town meeting to serve the needs of an ever-diversifying student population. The programs and services provided yield exceptional results. Overall, our students' academic success makes it clear that the town of Chelmsford is receiving a positive investment on its return in public education. I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish over the past few years, aligning our budget to support the district's goals, and again, providing an exceptional education to our students and supporting their social and emotional health and well-being. So I'm very proud that we were able to have this episode tonight to talk about our budgeting, and thank Laurie and Dennis for being on the show.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.